Us now from Capitol Hill, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York.
Senator, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. We will get to the speech in one moment, but we have to start with spring training. Are the Yankees preparing for another second-place season this year behind the Red Sox?
Well, you know, they still need some more starting pitching, Joe. You know, they just do, and they're not doing enough in that regard, not getting the real stars. They got a lot of hitting. They got backups at many of the positions, but gee whiz, I've never understood my Giants football not drafting an offensive line, and don't understand the Yankees not focusing on pitching.
Well,
starting pitching.
Let's
They're good with
hope
relief.
they continue to lose that focus. So last night in the speech...
By the way, I rooted for the Patriots. They were really exquisite. They were amazing.
That had to be hard.
Painful as that was.
Painful.
I'm mad at the Rams for leaving St. Louis. I fought hard, as you know, to keep the Bills in Buffalo. These teams shouldn't get up and leave just to make more money.
All right.
Agree.
Speaking of painful,
nice talking to you. I'll see you in a few weeks.
Exactly. So what was your take on the president's speech last night?
Well, look, I think Stacey Abrams showed the president what real leadership was. She was empathetic, she was compassionate. She talked about the real America, where middle-class people are worried about staying in the middle class. People trying to get to the middle class think it's harder to get there. The president was political, he was divisive, he was calculating. At times he was even nasty. And you cannot give a speech where you talk about unifying and then all the emphasis on the speech is divisiveness. That won't fly. He was sort of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but he was much more enthusiastic about the Mr. Hyde role.
How interesting is they were telling us it was going to be a unifying speech and unifying president. Last night he was insulting you as well as insulting a deceased American war hero, John McCain.
I can answer, but John McCain is a hero, and to do what he did to him, but that's who he is. You know, what got his goat, I guess, was when I earlier said, you know, for 364 days he's divisive, and now he's going to give a speech. If he talks about unity, he's got to keep doing it. And he answered mine with an epithet. You don't do that. Answer on the merits. He can answer me. I don't mind.
Casey Hunt.
Leader Schumer, good to see you. Based on what you heard last night from the president on border security, how confident are you that we are not going to have another government shutdown at the end of next week?
Well, you know, the president's in a bubble. He doesn't really get what's going on. He plays to about 30% of America, and he thinks that's sufficient. And so when you heard his speech, you said, uh-oh. But if the president stays out of it, I am confident that the Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, can come up with an agreement that each side can live with, and we can pass it. We've done that on two previous budgets.
I don't think anybody disagrees with you there. I mean, I certainly don't, based on all of my reporting, but how confident are you that the president can stay out of it?
I don't know. I mean, he can't help himself. He's in a hole. He had a great opportunity in that speech to dig himself out of the hole. Everyone is yearning for unity. Everyone is yearning for coming together. On the potential unifying pieces, he sort of brushed over them, didn't talk about real infrastructure bill, he mentions in one line that he's for paid family leave. He's talked about that before. And he gets excited about the most divisive parts of the speech, immigration, abortion, things like that. So this president can't help himself out of his hole. And that's a real problem here.
David Ignatius.
Mr. Leader, one of the signature lines in the speech I thought was when President Trump denounced the ridiculous partisan investigation.
Yeah.
Yes.
At another point, he said he wanted peace and legislation, not war and investigation.
Yeah.
Can I ask you as directly as I can whether the Congress, the Senate, are going to give him that relief from investigation, or whether you think the Congress will push ahead as fast as it can?
Well, I think that, look, one of the Article 1 functions of the legislative branch, the Congress, is oversight of the executive branch. The Founding Fathers were worried, with justification we see more than ever today, of a overreaching executive. So investigating, oversight, if it's done in a thoughtful, careful way, and all indications are that it is, even Republicans in the House are praising how the Democrats are beginning to proceed in the House, that's our function. Now, I'd ask this question. What is the president afraid of? If he had nothing to hide, he'd shrug his shoulders at these investigations. Instead, he once again, seems to be his new MO, holds the American people hostage and say, if you investigate me, we're not going to make any progress. What kind of president is that? Again, Stacey Abrams showed such leadership and strength. Here's the president talking that the economy's great. Well, it's great if you're into stock buybacks. It's great if you're the wealthiest in America, but the average American doesn't feel they've got a great future. Stacey talked about that. The president acted like everything's great. It means he's only talking to people who are doing well.
Leader Schumer, it's Willie Geist. It's good to see you this morning. I think a lot of Americans watched that address last night, and when the president said America will never be a socialist country, they saw a lot of Democrats sitting on their hands and not applauding that. What's your view of your party's drift, not entirely, but in many prominent members, towards socialism?
Well, you got to separate the thing. Look, we all believe strongly in democracy. There are people in the Democratic Party who want more government intervention. I wouldn't quite call it socialism. There are others who want to leave a little more to the private sector.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that all of us believe that when you look at the State of the Union on the economy, it's not good for middle-class families. They're worried and even more worried about their children. You look at the state of the economy on health care, it's failing middle-class families. This is the first year that we have fewer people covered than a year before. And so, you have to focus on what's really happening here, and the president is just not doing that. One of the things really that galled me, he says, we have to keep protecting pre-existing conditions. And at the very same time, his administration is engaged in a lawsuit to eliminate the protections for pre-existing conditions. The hypocrisy is monumental. I've never seen it in another president, not any. Not Nixon, not Harding, not anybody.
Why would
So,
he
Senator
echo
Schumer,
Nixon?
you're obviously one of the top Democrats, not only on the Hill, but also in America. Can you state can you undermine what Donald Trump said last night? Said that basically suggesting that Democrats want to turn America to a socialist country. As leader of the Democrats in the Senate, do you support America? Hold on a second. Hold on. Do you support American capitalism, and do you think American capitalism is worth defending and fighting for?
Okay, the answer is we are a capitalist country, yes, and you have to work with capitalism, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't make it better. I mean,
Agreed.
I put out an op-ed, you would be sympathetic to this, Joe, because I've heard you talk about these buybacks, where we said, listen to this number, from 2007 to 2016, the top 500 companies, 83% of their profits went to buybacks and to dividends. None of that money goes to helping their workers, helping their communities. That's why Senator Sanders and I said that we should not allow buybacks. They didn't used to exist before 1980 unless they're going to help their workers. That's not socialism. That's
Senator,
putting guardrails on capitalism, and that's what we need.
And Senator, didn't you and other Democrats warn Republicans if they voted for this Trump tax cut that they would mainly be helping huge multinational corporations have stock buybacks?
That's just what happened. Remember what Donald Trump said? This tax bill will give every American a $4,000 tax increase. Well, if your income is over $1 million a year, you probably got more than that. But if you're an average middle-class family, you didn't see close to that. And he's listening to some of these hard-right people, and they are saying the only type of capitalism that should exist is without guardrails, like back in the 1890s. We believe that we need to improve capitalism and have it, in the 60s, Joe, corporations had much more of an obligation, not just to their shareholders, but to their workers and their communities and to America. It's devolved so that they're slavishly devoted just to the shareholders, and that hurts working people, and that should change. That's not socialism. That's improving capitalism. And big business doesn't like it, and the right-wing Republicans call it socialism. It is not.
Senator Chuck Schumer, thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so
Yankees.
much.
Beat the
All
Red
right,
Sox.
Coming up, stop! One of the things that sets presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard apart from Donald Trump ahead of 2020. Unlike the president, she wasted no time denouncing David Duke and rejecting his endorsement. The Democratic congresswoman joins us ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.